In the theme of Father's Day, medical professionals, what's the best reaction you've seen from a dad during and/or after the birth of his child? Story 1. One of my good friends is a nurse at a regional hospital that serves the greater Tuscaloosa area. She told me this one a few weeks back. This is paraphrased to the best of what I can remember. It was the end of my shift and I was tired. I'd been on for 12 hours and I wanted to go home, but an extremely pregnant lady was just wheeled into admission. I saw this and groaned a bit because I knew I was going to have to help. So about 7 hours later, the doctor, another nurse, and I are sitting in a delivery room watching this chick's snatch vomit up a baby. I've seen this several times before, comes with the job description. Anyway, the head was crowning and the dad, who had been there the entire time comforting the crap out of his wife and just being an absolutely amazing husband, was just hunkered down watching this baby be born while holding his wife's hand. The first baby's out. It's a girl. He nods and keeps watching. Second baby out, also a girl. He nods. After we let the mom hold the girls, we took them to the nursery while the mom got situated. You know the drill. Dad disappeared. I didn't see him for another hour and a half, and I assumed he went home to shower or nap while the wife's parents took after everything here. My shift was over, so I got my crap out of my locker and started to head home. On a whim, I decided to pass by the nursery to take a look at the twins I helped deliver. The dad was standing there with this really weird look on his face. Another nurse told me the guy had been standing there for about 2 hours just looking at his kids. I asked him if he was okay, and he said, "Yeah, looks like I'm a dad now," and then burst into some really heavy sobs. I freaked out a little bit and tried to console him, but he quit just as fast as he started, and his expression changed to that of pure, unbridled joy. He apologized and then told me he was so excited to know who his little girls were going to be that he just couldn't stop looking at them. I started getting nervous about halfway through, but then everything turned out better than expected. Yeah, I've got to admit, I was a little bit worried that there was going to be a kind of bad, dark twist, but it turned out to be an exceptionally sweet story that puts a huge smile on my face. You love to hear about stuff like that and people who are that happy to be a dad, so good for him. Story 2. Okay, I'm an L&D nurse on duty in the middle of the night with no patients, so I'll do my best to serve up some tales. We had a lovely patient who once had had a string of losses. She could get to about halfway and then miscarry. Well, our doctors figured out the problem and got her through another pregnancy, only for the baby to suffer a cord accident, O2 supply would cut off, and pass away at term. It was a blow not only for the mom and the dad, but to us as well, since we had come to know these really nice, kind people. Everyone was tiptoeing around, quiet and somber. We delivered her a dead little girl and let them hold her, talk to her, and say goodbye. I thought I could keep it together until they left, right up until I walked back into the room to bring the baby to the morgue. They had left the room by then, but had wrapped up their pretty little 8-pound girl in a beautiful new white blankie and laid her in the crib. She looked like she was sleeping and was still warm, and on top of her, tucked in the folds of the blanket, was one perfect, long-stemmed, creamy pink rose. The dad had left a note. For our perfect little girl, name. Maintaining our professional distance, my coworker and I then burst into big, loud, sloppy sobs. I'm sniffing right now remembering this. She was a pretty baby, not a mark on her. She'd be 13 or 14 now, I believe. Story's not done. 2 years later, they came back with a live pregnancy, and this time everyone was totally invested in the outcome. We hovered outside the door whilst she was in labor, fingers crossed, willing her to be okay. When she was pushing, we gave up all pretense of objectivity and clustered in the hallway, holding our breath. When the baby gave his first cry, we all forgot ourselves, cheered loudly, and then, embarrassed, ran away. It was truly one of the happiest births I've ever attended. That is a really touching story, and I would never wish for anyone to have to go through miscarriages and losing a child that they want. I can't comprehend how heartbreaking that will be for hopeful parents. But it is nice to hear that this story at least had such a nice happy ending, and I'm sure that those parents have given that child a lot of love. Story 3. I've worked in the local EMS system for about 6 years. In that time, I've become acquainted with a lot of the floor staff. Before my son was born, we arrived at the L&D unit, and I was greeted by the staff warmly and excitedly. They made sure that both my then-wife and I were treated with the best of care. Fast forward to 40 hours later. She had been in labor for 36 of them. I had not slept at all in that time frame, nor have I eaten. I was too nervous to leave her side, worried that I would miss the birth of my first child. The moment arrives. She's crowning. I'm there holding her hand and being as comforting as I can when it hits me like a sack of bricks. Holy crap, you're about to have a kid. You, the irresponsible paramedic, you're about to be responsible for another human being. That played on repeat in my head. As my gorgeous son was delivered, the combination of exhaustion, stress, and hunger took me out. I remember hearing the nurse say, "Wow, he looks really pale. Oh, crap." Then a whiteout and a thud. I woke up to ED staff, some of my fellow EMS crews, and L&D staff standing over me. To this day, I have not yet lived down that I, a 6'1", 300-pound ex-rugby player paramedic, was knocked out by a newborn who was 21 inches long, weighing 7 pounds, 1 ounces. I love that story. Story 4. When my sister was born in the 80s, my dad was ill-prepared for what newborns sometimes look like when they come out. Newborn skulls are kinda squishy, so when my sis got squeezed out, her head got a little squashed and came out kinda conehead-like. In the delivery room, my dad smiled and said she was beautiful. Then he immediately exited, started crying, and called his friend Mike, a doctor, and said, "I don't know, man. There's something wrong with her. She came out looking like a friggin' hammerhead shark." His buddy had to convince him nothing was wrong and the head would go back to normal. Apparently, he kept saying, "But she looks like a friggin' hammerhead," over and over again. Story 5. Dad here. My second child was born with bright, shiny red hair. Neither me nor her mom have red hair. There are about 10 or 15 assorted doctors, interns, nurses, etc. in the room. One of the interns sees the hair and immediately says, "So, does red hair run in your family?" Every medical professional in the room sucks in a breath. They knew the dangers of asking such a question, probably from previous births. I looked the intern in the eye and said, "Yes, hers and mine." Everyone breathed a collective sigh of relief and immediately went back to what they were doing. Had I been quicker on my feet, I would have said something to the effect of, "No, wait, frick, I knew it," and stormed out while everyone glared evilly at the intern. It would have taught him a lesson. Okay, but like, show of hands, who would have done it not to teach that person a lesson, but, I mean, just because it would be kind of funny? I mean, I don't think that's too mean, right? That's not too mean. I don't know who I'm looking at. Nobody's here except my dogs. And they're, it's a bit of a judgmental look. Okay, maybe that's too much. Story 6. My dad was a singer when I was little. He'd sing to me before I was born. I always heard that the first time he held me, he started singing Brown-Eyed Girl, and I stopped crying to listen because I recognized his voice. I have a similar story. My dad likes to tell the story of how they handed me to him. I was wailing, of course, and he said, "It's okay, Daddy's here." I stopped crying because I recognized his voice from reading a lot of Reader's Digest to my mom's stomach. Story 7. My mom loves to tell the story about my older brother, parents' first kid, being born. They got to the hospital around 2 a.m., and after the initial examination, the doctor said it was going to be a while still and disappeared. An hour or so later, the nurse says it's getting to be time, so she goes to find the doctor and can't. He's not answering pages, anything. There was a trash can at the foot of the bed, and my dad started freaking out, yelling about his first kid being born straight into a trash can, and what a horrible start to life that is. Another nurse calmed him down just in time for the doctor to show up yawning. He'd fallen asleep somewhere, and nothing was waking him up. Story 8. My dad decided to tell me all the gory details of my birth one day. I was a breech baby, so I came out butt first. My mom said it was appropriate because of my general attitude towards the world. Meh. Anyway, he said that he didn't really understand what he was seeing at first, just something ballooning out of my mom, and then all of a sudden a floppy little raw chicken leg came flying out, flapping all over the place. And then another popped out, wildly flopping around as well. He said it was like something out of a sci-fi horror flick. And then the rest of my family came out and they cleaned me up, but watching me come out butt first apparently traumatized him. He always gets this look when recounting the story. Honestly, I think that we should let this dad write the description in Wikipedia for, like, how birth goes and everything, because I just love floppy little chicken legs coming out like a sci-fi horror movie that, like, no, yeah, but you know what? It captures both kind of like the visceral goriness of birth and the lighthearted love, the miracle. Maybe not as much that second part, but I like it. Story 9. Not a birth story, but I remember going to sit on the judge's lap when my stepfather adopted me. I was 4 at the time. I remember him asking me if I wanted him to be my dad, and I nodded yes. 30 years later, he's been there for me every frick-up, every triumph, every disappointment. He's the best dad ever, and I love him. I love when there is adoption day at the courthouse. So often I see families get ruined by divorce and DYFS cases that I get overjoyed to see new families being formed. Hopefully you can spend another 30 years with that amazing man in your life. Story 10. I was a C-section baby. A couple of years ago, the topic came up with my parents while drinking. I mentioned that it sounds kind of gross. My father looks me right in the eye and says, "Have you ever seen Alien? It was just like that." I've seriously threatened my wife with watching the Alien trilogy when she was pregnant. I almost passed out at the first C-section. I too am a baby of the cesarean section, but I was coming out butt first, but sadly for me, no chicken legs flopping out, so they had to cut my mom open to let this big baby boy out. I'm very sorry, Mom. I love you so much. Story 11. I was born in the 80s, and the ultrasound technology wasn't that great. What my parents didn't know was that instead of one baby, there were 2. Our hearts were beating at the same time, and they could never tell the sex, so they thought it was just one giant baby. So I came out, then my mom says, "Doc, I still feel pain," and he looks and says, "I see another head." Apparently my father said, "What the frick? Whose baby is that?" And then my sister popped out. Story 12. When I was born, my father, who's a gynecologist himself, came to watch me do my big entrance, or exit depending on how you look at it, and said to my mom, "You're not going to believe what you just did. I was over 10 pounds at birth. My uncle was 13 pounds when he was born in the late 1930s. My grandmother was 5 foot 1 inches tall, and he was her first child. That woman had a uterus and vagina of steel, no other explanation. Apparently she couldn't feel her legs properly for about 3 months after." Story 13. My dad went to the hospital to visit me and my mom at the time. After hearing a baby scream so loud you could hear it from the elevator, he turns to the nurse with a silly grin on his face and tells her, "Well, this one has quite the vocal cords. I feel sorry for his parents already." She turns to him and tells him, trying not to laugh, "You'll tell me. It's yours." Story 14. A story comes to mind of a friend who, when his son was born, just started crying hysterically and hugged everyone, the doctor, nurses. He even ran out into the hallway and hugged people visiting other patients. Always makes me smile when I think of it. Aw, this makes me want to have kids, but I still probably won't. This sounds like the kind of dad that inspired movie characters that were destined to be portrayed by Jimmy Stewart. All I can imagine is this guy going around just like, "I had a baby girl! I had a baby girl! Merry Christmas, Bedford Falls! I had a baby girl!" It's not a great Jimmy Stewart. Story 15. My friend told me this story. He was born with an umbilical cord wrapped around his neck, so he was a little purple when he was born. His mom couldn't see what he looked like. His dad told her, "He looks like a California raisin." Ha! I actually had the reverse problem. I was hyperoxygenated and was red. My dad actually said, "Put this one back, she's not done yet." Story 16. My dad is a carpenter and was at work when he was told that my mom was in labor with me. His reaction? He went into a shocked stupor and accidentally shot his thumb with a nail gun. And that's the story of why my then 11-year-old sister had to fill out my birth certificate. Story 17. My birth was both a terrifying and wonderful day all at the same time. My mother hemorrhaged pretty badly, so my dad had this turbulent hour in which he was both crying with joy over the birth of his first child and also with terror at the thought of losing his wife. The doctors wouldn't let him back in the room while they were trying to save my mom's life, so apparently for this hour all he did was pace the hallways outside the room holding me and refusing to let anyone else near me, as if he was already preparing for it to just be me and him. My dad has never stopped being an utterly devoted and emotional father. Story 18. At a forceps delivery last night, the dad-to-be was so horrified, impressed by the amount of pain his wife had gone through during her labor, that he phoned up his own mum to say thanks. Story 19. When I was born after 13 hours of labor, my dad looked at my full head of black hair and blue eyes, looked at my mom and said, "Are you sure she's mine?" My grandfather was the one the nurses let carry me back to my mom post-cleanup, and when my mom asked if I was okay, he said, "Yeah, I don't think the extra 2 toes will be a big hindrance," which led my mom frantically tearing the blankets off to check my toes. Basically, the men in my family are dongs. My dad honestly believed I had extra toes. He counted 5 times before my mother stepped in to correct him. Okay, look, those are both just way overused dad jokes. They are not funny anymore, but they're allowed to make those jokes because they just became dads. It's almost a biological imperative that once they become a dad officially, that they have to just spew out overused jokes in some attempt to try and be funny even when they're not, and that's okay. We love you, dads. Story 20. My brother was born about a year and a half after me, and my mother had gone into false labor so many times that she only knew she was really in labor when she couldn't sleep that night. Anyways, later at the hospital, the doctor said that she was going to be in labor for a lot longer, so he went and ate dinner. She wasn't in labor for much longer. My grandmother delivered the kid and was holding him when the nurse walks by and says, "You can't do that." My grandmother retorts with, "Well, I'm not going to put it back." That doesn't sound like a very good nurse. Story 21. My father, up until I was born, had not ever seen a newborn baby. Naturally, he assumed that all babies look like they do in movies or commercials. As you can imagine, he was quite disappointed when an alien-looking thing was handed to him and introduced to him as his daughter. He handed me back to the doctors and went outside for a smoke to calculate how much all of the plastic surgeries were going to cost. Newborn babies are kind of gross-looking, sticky and covered in baby cheese. Ugh. Story 22. My own husband during my first C-section. The doctor asks if he wants to look over the curtain at the baby being delivered. He looks over, looks back with a look of horror. "What's wrong?" "Your insides are on your outsides." I will never forget the look on his face or the sound of his voice. "They are ripping you apart," is what my husband said in that exact situation. Story 23. When I was born, they took me off immediately to clean me, take my footprints, bundle me up, and whatnot. I guess the 2 nurses were in a bit of a hurry and were doing both at the same time and managed to get a print of my left foot twice instead of a left and a right. Apparently, upon seeing the prints, he became extremely distressed and literally ripped the blanket off of me to make sure I didn't actually have 2 left feet. That dad was so concerned with his baby having 2 left feet, I wouldn't be surprised if he was like a dance instructor, like, "Oh my god, my child has 2 left feet. They'll never strut the boards. I can't be here right now." I used to be a dance instructor. Story 24. A buddy of mine just cried the whole time his twins were being born. He was 25 at the time. His wife was rather unamused. Story 26. Kind of on topic, my mom said when she woke up my dad to tell him her water broke, he jumped out of bed and started sweeping. She asked what the F he was doing and he said, "I have to clean, the baby is coming." Just imagine what he's going to think of these floors. Okay, no joke, this sounds like the reaction that I would probably have, because as much as I am a morning person who loves to get up before the sun rises, if you wake me up any time before that, I will be incoherent at best and deranged at worst. Story 27. According to my parents, I was a super fast delivery, like so fast that the doctors and nurses had stepped out of the room to go attend to someone else, and my mom grabbed my dad and told him to get ready to catch me. My dad didn't even have time to put on gloves and had to catch me, baby gunk and all. Apparently he smiled, passed me to the nurses, who came rushing in, kissed my mom on the lips, then leaned over and vomited everywhere. My brother's birth was less than 15 minutes after my mother's water broke. They cut my mom's pants off, and that was as far as they got. Story 28. My son's father is a very well-educated, well-spoken man. He was with me in the hospital room when I gave birth, and the first thing he said after seeing our son for the first time was, "Oh my God, look at his balls!" They are huge on a newborn. Story 29. I was born on Father's Day. Funny story. My dad had got tennis rackets and tennis balls as a Father's Day gift, so he was playing with them in the basement, hitting balls against the wall when my mom went into labor. So she yelled at him from the top of the stairs that the baby was coming, and my dad, he says, "Okay, dear, I'll be down here playing tennis." She was livid, and thank you for birthday wishes. Not till the 20th, though. My mom went into labor late in the evening. My dad was asleep. He had to work early. She went in and said, "The baby is coming, get up." He replied, "Calm down, it's fine. Go have a cold bath." So she had my grandma take her to the hospital. In my dad's defense, if he sleeps as heavily as me, he probably wasn't even awake for this. Story 30. My biological father was out drinking while I was born. My mom's best friend and the man I consider my father was there the whole time and used to tell me all the time how I could fit in one of his hands. Each time he told me, he looked teary-eyed. Story 31. When my dad was born, my grandpa wasn't even there. He was asleep in the lobby of the hospital. The doctor had to go and find him to tell him he was a father. When he came into the delivery room and the doctor showed him to my dad, he only had one thing to say. "I thought they were supposed to be cute." In his defense, dads in the room didn't become common until the 70s and 80s. Ah, yes, back in the day when men were men and didn't care about things like babies and all that. What's that? My child? Does it have a job yet? Pathetic. Story 32. It was a Sunday, and my mom was in labor with me. The doctor comes in and asks, "How's it going?" Mom, "Oh, I'm feeling..." Doctor? "Oh no, the football game. The Bears are playing. How's it going?" Dad, "Up by 7. Story 33. I was delivered by C-section, but apparently my mom's contractions were so intense that while holding my dad's hand, she squeezed so tight that she broke his hand. Mind you, my dad is 6'4" with huge hands, and my mom is only about 5'5". Story 34. The day I was born, my dad took me down every hall in the hospital and showed me off to everyone who would look. "Look how beautiful my little girl is." My mom said he was gone with me for over an hour. That is just the sweetest thing. Put a big grin on my face. "Look at this beautiful thing that I made." Look, that's very sweet, and I'm very happy that the dad was so excited. But also, the mom just did all the hard work, and then the dad, grabs the baby and just runs off like a goblin with it, just like, "Look what I made! Look what I made!" Meanwhile, the mom is just lying there like, "Where's the baby I made? Bring it back, Dad!" Story 35. I was in the OR assisting with a C-section. Dad was there and he passed out and crapped himself. I thought it was pretty fantastic. "Dad, stop! You're embarrassing me." Story 36. My dad likes to tell the story of my birth over and over. They knew I would be born early. At 6 months, the doctors realized they couldn't keep me in any longer. They warned my dad that I wouldn't cry because I was so premature. Not only did I come out mad as heck, but I screamed my little head off too. They also told my dad that at 2 pounds, I only had a 5% chance of survival, 1973, mind you. I proved them wrong on both counts. I was a preemie, born at 26 weeks, and came out screaming bloody murder as well. Cheers. Story 37. My dad broke his back a few days before my mom went into labor with my brother. He was still in the hospital recovering from surgery, not able to walk around yet. My mom went into labor in the same hospital, and my dad demanded for a large enough room for 2 beds and that they wheel his butt down to her room so he could be with her. So my dad was laying in a hospital bed with a broken back right next to my mom when she had my brother. I don't know why, but this story is the sweetest to me. The fact that this guy's back was broken and he's like, "Take me to my wife. I have to be there for the birth of our child. I'll do whatever it takes." If my back was just twisted and hurt and the hospital was on fire, I'd be like, "Oh, do I have to go? Maybe this part will be fine." Story 38. Thankfully, not one that I personally saw, but when my younger cousin was born, they had someone who was still training in the room, observing and whatnot. Well, after the birth, she was in charge of taking care of the placenta. It slipped out of her hands and splattered all over the floor. He was so disgusted by it that he fainted. Story 39. Naturally, like most babies, I was crying after I was born. My dad was yelling at the nurses, saying that they were doing something wrong since I wouldn't stop crying. They kicked him out of the room. Story 40. For the birth of my oldest brother, he was rubbing his hand. She asked him why he's rubbing his hand. My dad said, "Well, you were squeezing my hand pretty hard." My mom asks, "Why didn't you tell me I was hurting you?" Dad says, "Well, I figured you were in more pain than I was." ETA, they've now been married 31 years, and they both endured 4 more childbirths. That's adorable. Oh man, I mean, that's just kind of sweet to me, where it's just like, no, it's okay, my hand's fine and everything. Like, oh, hon, you should have said something. It's like, no, it looked like you were dealing with a little more important stuff. Story 41. Oh, my dad started freaking out so much when I was born that he stole my mom's oxygen mask for himself. The doctor started yelling at him about how the baby, me, needed the oxygen and had to steal it away from him. Story 42. An older resident once told me a story about how he was working in New York City in his youth. There was a blizzard and a guy couldn't get his wife to the hospital in time. She gave birth at home and they brought them in to check up on the baby and mother. The dude is obviously in shock from the delivery and keeps saying, "I told him," the baby, "to stay in there. I told him to stay. Not an hour old and he has already stopped listening to me." Cracks me up every time he tells it. I'm just getting a hilarious mental image of this guy screaming, "Stop, stop," at his wife's vagina. "Don't you do it, baby. Don't you come out of there. No, you no, you do. Oh God, no. Story 43. When I was younger and mad at my parents, I told them I hoped that I was switched at birth because there was no way I could be related to them. My mom said that wasn't possible because my dad literally never let go of me when I was at the hospital. He stayed with me the whole time because he was afraid someone would try to switch their crappy baby with his awesome baby. Story 44. When I was born, my dad pulled out a Sharpie and drew a star at the bottom of my foot to make sure they didn't lose me. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.